Evelyn Carter had promised herself that her new beginning in Seattle would be quiet. After her divorce, she was done with chaos, arguments, and late-night tears. She wanted peace, a kind of life that didn't demand much, just a calm morning with coffee and evenings with her favorite books. She rented a small house on a tree-lined street where neighbors waved and children played. It was exactly what she thought she needed until she met the couple next door, Ryan and Claire. Hudson were the kind of people everyone liked. They smiled easily, spoke kindly, and made everyone around them feel seen. From the first day, they had offered Evelyn help with unpacking, invited her for dinner, and even left flowers at her door when she moved in. Their kindness felt genuine, and Evelyn, though still guarded, couldn't help but feel drawn to them. She admired how effortlessly they seemed to understand each other, finishing sentences, sharing quiet smiles, moving through life as a team. It was the kind of connection she used to dream of, but never really had. For weeks, their friendship stayed simple. They'd talk across the fence, share recipes, or wave from their driveways. Sometimes Claire would invite Evelyn over for coffee in the mornings, while Ryan joined them briefly before leaving for work. Evelyn liked the normalcy. No drama, no questions about her past. Just warmth. But things began to shift one evening, almost without anyone realizing. It was a late summer night when Ryan and Claire hosted a small gathering in their backyard. Fairy lights hung over the fence, soft music played, and the air smelled like grilled food and fresh grass. Evelyn almost didn't go. She was shy, still rebuilding her confidence after the separation, but Claire insisted gently. "Come on, it's just neighbors and stories. You'll love it." So she went. That evening changed something she couldn't fully name. The laughter, the light conversation, it was simple. Yes, but Evelyn felt something she hadn't in a long time: belonging. At one point, as everyone sat around the fire pit, Evelyn caught Ryan's gaze. It wasn't a bold stare, not something inappropriate, but it held quiet attention. He looked at her like he was really seeing her, not as a guest, not as a neighbor, but as a person carrying stories she never told. The look was brief, but it stayed with her. Claire noticed. Evelyn thought she'd misread the small smile that crossed Claire's face, but it wasn't a jealous or uncomfortable one. It was knowing, almost thoughtful. The way Claire's hand reached for Ryan's said everything: trust, ease, and something deeper. Evelyn couldn't understand it at that moment, but she felt it. That silent understanding between the three of them. The night went on, full of laughter and stories about places they'd been and things they missed. But beneath the joy, there was a quiet pulse, an unspoken feeling, gentle but undeniable. Every time Ryan laughed, Evelyn noticed the kindness in his eyes. Every time Claire spoke, Evelyn admired her warmth and calm. For the first time since her marriage ended, Evelyn felt connected, not romantically, but emotionally. It was strange, maybe even confusing, but comforting all the same. As the night ended, most guests left early. Evelyn stayed to help Claire clean up. They talked about simple things: favorite books, old dreams, and how time changes people. When Ryan brought in the last tray of glasses, the three of them stood for a moment under the lights. It was quiet, and for some reason, none of them wanted to move. There was nothing said, yet the air felt heavy with unspoken thoughts, not inappropriate ones, but the kind that come when people truly understand each other without words. Evelyn walked home later that night, her heart strangely restless. She wasn't used to feeling this alive or this aware. She kept thinking about that small glance, that soft smile, that shared silence. It wasn't about romance or desire. It was about connection, pure and rare. Something in that moment reminded her that human hearts still respond to kindness, even when they've been broken. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was nothing. Neighbors could be kind. Married couples could be friendly. But deep down, she knew something had changed in her that evening. She couldn't stop replaying small details: the way Ryan had listened when she talked, how Claire had made her feel welcome, how none of them seemed ready to end the night. It wasn't the start of anything forbidden, just an awakening of feelings she thought she'd lost forever. Later, lying in bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what she felt. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't attraction in a way that broke any line. It was curiosity about people, about connection, about how sometimes souls recognize each other before reason catches up. She had spent so long closing her heart off, believing that warmth like that didn't exist anymore. But tonight reminded her that connection could appear quietly in glances, in shared silence, in moments that didn't need to be labeled. She turned off the lamp, yet sleep didn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that moment again, the glow of the lights, the calm in Claire's smile, the depth in Ryan's eyes. It wasn't about wanting anything from them. It was about the way they made her feel seen. And after months of being invisible, that feeling was everything. Outside her window, the neighborhood was asleep. A soft wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from next door. Evelyn smiled without meaning to. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not dramatic or loud, but slow and human. Not the kind of love that demanded anything, but the kind that quietly reminded you that you were still alive enough to feel. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and she didn't need to. All she knew was that something had shifted that evening. A small, invisible thread had formed between her and the couple next door. It wasn't a promise or a secret, just a silent understanding that sometimes people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to remind us what warmth feels like as she drifted into light sleep. Evelyn whispered a quiet thought to herself. Maybe it's okay to feel again. And somewhere beyond her window, the lights from Ryan and Claire's porch still glowed, soft, steady, and strangely comforting. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn didn't feel alone. She didn't know where this new connection might lead, or even if it should lead anywhere. But for now, that didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling, quiet, human, and real. It began with a look. One she hadn't expected, one she hadn't planned. But maybe that was how life worked. It gave you moments that reminded you that hearts, no matter how bruised, still have the courage to feel again. And that night, beneath the soft Seattle sky, Evelyn's heart quietly decided that maybe, just maybe, it was ready to begin again. A week after that quiet evening in Ryan and Claire's backyard, Evelyn tried to fall back into her routine. She told herself not to overthink what happened. It was just a moment, nothing more. But no matter how hard she tried, the memory lingered. The look in Ryan's eyes, the calmness in Claire's smile, the feeling of being seen, it all replayed in her mind like a scene she couldn't turn off. Then, one Friday afternoon, Claire called. Her voice was cheerful as always, yet softer somehow. "Hey, Evelyn, we're watching a movie tonight." Nothing fancy, just popcorn and an old classic. "You should join us." Evelyn hesitated, but before she could make an excuse, Claire added, "Please come. It's been a long week. We'd love your company." At word, we made her say yes. When she arrived later that evening, the house felt different from before. The lights were dim, the air smelled of butter and cinnamon, and a cozy blanket lay across the couch. Claire handed her a bowl of popcorn and smiled. "You picked a good night. We're watching Before Sunrise. It's simple, quiet, like life when it slows down." Evelyn had seen the film before, two strangers talking all night about love, timing, and connection. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. And maybe that's why she liked it. Ryan joined them, sitting on the other side of Evelyn. The three of them settled in as the movie began. For a while, no one spoke. The room was filled with the soft glow of the screen and the rhythm of their breathing. Every so often, Evelyn felt Ryan's arm brush against hers or Claire's shoulder lean closer as they all reached for popcorn. None of it was planned. It just happened. It wasn't romantic, but it felt human. The kind of closeness that said, "You're safe here." As the movie went on, Evelyn forgot about her worries. She laughed at small moments, wiped a tear when the characters spoke about mischances, and felt an ache deep in her chest, that longing for connection she thought she had buried long ago. When the credits rolled, the room stayed quiet for a while. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was peaceful, like everyone was processing something they didn't want to say out loud. Claire finally broke the silence. That movie always makes me think about how fragile timing is, she said softly. How people meet, drift, and somehow still remember each other years later. Evelyn nodded. It's about being seen, even for a moment. Sometimes that's enough. Ryan looked at her, thoughtful. You really believe that? Evelyn smiled faintly. I think so. Because when someone sees you, truly sees you, even for a second, it changes something inside. No one spoke after that. Claire's eyes softened and Ryan looked away, almost shyly. The air felt warm but heavy, as if words hung between them, unspoken but understood. After a few minutes, Claire stood up. Let's get some tea, she said, heading to the kitchen. Evelyn followed, offering to help while Ryan stayed back, tidying the couch. The clinking of cups and the faint sound of running water filled the room. In the kitchen light, Claire looked different, not just kind, but thoughtful. Maybe even emotional. You know, Claire began quietly, Ryan and I. We used to be like those people in the movie, talking all night, dreaming about everything. But life got busy. Work, bills, plans. Sometimes I miss that feeling, that spark. She paused, handing Evelyn a cup. And then you moved in next door? Evelyn blinked, not sure what to say. Me? She asked softly. Claire nodded. You brought warmth with you. You reminded us of who we used to be. Her tone was gentle, not dramatic, just honest. Evelyn felt her heart ache, not because of the words, but because they carried truth. When they returned to the living room, Ryan looked up and smiled faintly. Tea break? He asked. Claire handed him a cup and sat beside him. Evelyn took her place again, feeling like she belonged there, not as a guest, but as part of something that made sense. They talked for a while about books, travels, simple dreams, the kind of conversation that goes beyond small talk and touches something real. Evelyn found herself laughing easily, her voice lighter than it had been in years. Ryan told her about his love for photography, how he tried to capture moments that couldn't be explained, like light falling through rain or faces caught, queened laughter and tears. Claire shared how she'd once wanted to open a small flower shop, but never had the courage to leave her job. Evelyn told them how she used to paint before life got too heavy. The night felt endless in the best way. There were no pretenses, no walls, just three people sharing what made them feel alive. When the clock struck midnight, Claire looked at Evelyn with a sleepy smile. You should stay for breakfast tomorrow. We'll make pancakes. Evelyn laughed softly. You'll get tired of me soon. Not a chance, Ryan said quietly, almost under his breath. But Claire heard him, and instead of reacting, she just smiled. It was a smile filled with calm, not jealousy, not confusion, but understanding. Evelyn left soon after. But as she stepped outside into the cool night, she felt something warm settle inside her chest. She wasn't falling for anyone. It wasn't that. It was deeper. For the first time in years, she felt connected to people, to herself, to life. It was the kind of connection that reminded her of how love, in its purest form, isn't always about romance. Sometimes it's about seeing and being seen. When she got home, the silence didn't feel lonely anymore. She sat on her porch, looking at the soft lights glowing through Ryan and Claire's window. She imagined them cleaning up, maybe talking quietly, maybe thinking about the same things she was. There was no guilt, no confusion, just an invisible thread of understanding. She realized something that night. Life often gives you people not to stay forever, but to teach you how to feel again. And maybe that's what Ryan and Claire were meant to do as she got ready for bed. Evelyn thought about the moment when Claire had said, "You remind me of how love begins." The words echoed in her mind long after the lights went out. It wasn't about love in a romantic sense. It was about renewal. About how sometimes, even in ordinary friendships, hearts can heal quietly. That night, as rain began to fall softly outside her window, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. She wasn't lonely anymore. She wasn't broken. She was just a woman who had found warmth again, sitting in a living room with two people who reminded her what human connection felt like. And as she drifted to sleep, She realized it wasn't the movie that had touched her most. It was the way Ryan and Claire had looked at her, not with judgment or pity, but with understanding. A kind of quiet acknowledgement that said, "You belong here too." For Evelyn, that was enough. Autumn came quietly to Seattle. The air turned crisp, and the trees on Evelyn's street changed from green to gold. She had started to feel at home again, in her house, in her skin, and in her connection with Ryan and Claire. What began as casual friendship had become something steady, almost necessary. They had fallen into a rhythm: dinners together, morning coffees, weekend walks. It felt natural, like they had known each other longer than a few months. Evelyn didn't question it much. She told herself that friendship could be deep without being complicated. But she also knew that something inside her had changed. The loneliness that used to fill her evenings was gone. She laughed again, shared stories again, and most of all, she felt again. Ryan and Claire had unknowingly helped her heal. Yet, beneath that warmth, something quiet but powerful was forming, an emotional closeness that none of them fully understood. One rainy evening, Claire asked Evelyn to help organize their garage. The rain was steady, the sound soft on the roof, and the air smelled of damp wood and old paint. They worked side by side, sorting through boxes, laughing about forgotten things. Ryan joined them later, wiping his hands on a towel, smiling the way he always did, calm and kind. It was ordinary, but there was comfort in that simplicity. After a while, Claire went inside to make tea, leaving Evelyn and Ryan alone. They continued working in silence until Ryan broke it softly. "You've brought something good into our lives, Evelyn," he said, his voice thoughtful. She looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the shelf, watching the rain fall through the small window. "Before you moved here, things were quiet between us, too quiet. We stopped laughing, stopped talking. You reminded us what connection feels like." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Evelyn didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure if he was thanking her or telling her something deeper. Before she could respond, Claire's voice called from the kitchen. The sound broke the moment, and both of them stepped back, almost relieved. When Claire returned with 3 steaming mugs, she noticed the quiet tension but didn't question it. Instead, she smiled and handed each of them a cup. "The rain's getting stronger," she said, sitting down beside Ryan. "Maybe it's a sign to stop working." The 3 of them sat together, sipping tea, watching the rain blur the view outside. It was peaceful, yet something felt different, heavier, but not in a bad way. It was as if they had crossed an invisible bridge without realizing it. They didn't need to talk much. Sometimes silence says everything later. When Ryan went upstairs to take a call, Claire and Evelyn stayed behind. The conversation drifted to life, love, and the quiet spaces between people. Claire's voice was calm but full of emotion. "You probably noticed," she said gently, "things between Ryan and me haven't always been perfect." Evelyn hesitated, unsure if she should respond. Claire continued, "We've had a few hard years. Work, family pressures, losing touch with each other. We were together, but distant." Evelyn looked at her, concern soft in her eyes. "I didn't mean to come between you two," she said quietly. Claire smiled, not sadly, but kindly. "You didn't come between us. You helped us remember what love feels like, to laugh, to care again. You brought life into our home." The words hit Evelyn harder than she expected. She had been afraid of exactly that, of somehow creating trouble without meaning to. But Claire's tone was calm, sincere. There was no anger, only understanding. Claire looked down at her cup and said softly, "Sometimes people forget how to love. Then someone walks in and reminds them, not by doing anything, but just by being themselves." Evelyn didn't know how to answer. She only nodded, her throat tight. It wasn't a confession of love or attraction. It was something deeper, gratitude mixed with vulnerability. It made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. When Ryan returned, the atmosphere felt different, gentler. He smiled at both women, unaware of the conversation that had passed. Claire reached for his hand without saying a word. He looked at her, surprised but touched. Evelyn watched the small gesture and felt warmth spread through her chest. Whatever was broken between them, it was slowly healing. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew stronger. Evelyn continued to visit, help with small things, and share meals. It wasn't about romance, it was about belonging. Each of them had found something in the other that filled a quiet space in their hearts. For Ryan, it was understanding. For Claire, it was lightness. For Evelyn, it was the comfort of being seen and accepted. But even with that peace, Evelyn sometimes lay awake at night, thinking about the thin line between closeness and emotion. She wondered if what they shared could last without being misunderstood. She cared for both of them deeply, but she also feared the fragility of such bonds. One Saturday morning, as they sat on the porch together, Ryan looked at Evelyn and said, "You know, you've changed the way we see things." Claire nodded in agreement. "You reminded us to look at life again, not through disappointment, but through kindness." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what we all needed, someone to remind us that life can still surprise us." They laughed, and for a while it felt like nothing in the world could touch that quiet peace. But later that day, when Evelyn returned home, she caught herself thinking about Ryan's words in the garage. "You've brought something back into our lives." It wasn't just gratitude. There was emotion behind it, deep, honest, and unspoken. And Claire's acceptance of it all made it even more complex. That evening, rain returned, steady and soothing. Evelyn sat by her window, watching the drops race down the glass. She thought about how strange it was that three people could be so connected without needing to define it. There was no label for what they shared. Not friendship, not love, not anything ordinary. It was simply understanding, a kind that life rarely gives twice. As thunder rolled in the distance, she realized something profound. Love doesn't always arrive as romance. Sometimes it comes quietly, dressed as kindness, empathy, or shared silence. It doesn't always end with a kiss or a promise. Sometimes it just teaches you that you can still feel deeply even after heartbreak. Evelyn didn't know what the future held. Maybe things would stay as they were, or maybe life would pull them in different directions. But for now, she was content. The loneliness she once carried had turned into gratitude for their laughter, their trust, their honesty. The next day, she visited them again. The air smelled of rain and freshly brewed coffee. Claire greeted her with a hug, and Ryan smiled from across the table. No words were needed. Everything was understood. And as they sat together, 3 cups of coffee between them and sunlight breaking through the clouds, Evelyn realized something simple but beautiful, that human connection doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be felt in that moment, surrounded by warmth and gentle laughter. Evelyn knew that whatever this bond was, friendship, care, or something beyond words, it had already changed her life forever. Winter arrived quietly, wrapping the Seattle neighborhood in cold air and pale light. Evelyn's days had become peaceful again, work, reading, evening walks. But now her world always circled back to the house next door. Ryan and Claire had become part of her life in a way she hadn't expected. Their friendship had grown steady and deep, built on trust, shared moments, and countless quiet conversations. It wasn't dramatic, but it was meaningful. A kind of connection that didn't need grand words to feel real. Over time, Evelyn noticed that she and Ryan talked more easily. Often about little things, art, travel, books. There was nothing wrong about it. Claire was usually there, smiling, joining in, sometimes just listening. It was as if they all understood that something gentle had taken root among them. Not love in a forbidden sense, but something full of understanding and emotion. They cared for each other, each in their own quiet way. One evening, the three of them sat by the fireplace. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows. Inside, the room glowed warm, filled with the soft hum of a jazz record. Claire rested her head against Ryan's shoulder, and Evelyn sat close by, sipping tea. The silence was calm, not awkward, the kind that comes when people feel safe with one another. Claire spoke first. Her voice was soft, thoughtful. "You know, Evelyn," she said, "we've been wanting to tell you something." Evelyn looked up, unsure what was coming. Claire exchanged a glance with Ryan, the kind that said everything without words. Then she continued, "We both care about you. More than just neighbors or friends. You've become part of our life in a way that's hard to describe." Evelyn froze for a moment, her cup halfway to her lips. She didn't know what to say. Claire wasn't smiling out of politeness. Her tone was sincere, kind. Ryan added gently, "You brought light back into this house. We'd forgotten how to connect, how to feel close, and then you walked in. You reminded us of who we were." For a few seconds, the room was silent except for the rain. Evelyn's heart pounded. She felt warmth spread through her chest, not excitement, but deep emotion. She understood what they meant. This wasn't about romance. It was about the way people can find each other when they need healing the most. She set her cup down carefully. "I care about you both too," she said quietly. "You've made me feel like I belong again." Claire reached out and took her hand. "We never expected this," she said. "It's not something we planned. But sometimes life brings people together for a reason. Maybe to teach us something. Maybe to help us remember what love, the pure kind, really is." Ryan nodded slowly. Love doesn't always fit into boxes. Sometimes it's just understanding. Sometimes it's about being seen. Evelyn felt tears form in her eyes, but she smiled. For the first time in years, she felt full, not because she was loved in a romantic way, but because she was understood. They weren't crossing boundaries. They didn't need to. The emotion that existed between them was honest and safe, built on empathy, not desire. They sat like that for a while, three people, connected by something rare. The fire crackled, the rain softened, and for a brief moment, the world outside disappeared. Evelyn thought about how strange and beautiful it was that hearts could meet without expectation. She had spent years believing love had to follow rules, but now she saw that sometimes love was simply recognition of pain, of hope, of shared humanity. After that night, nothing outwardly changed between them. They still shared meals, took walks, and talked late into the evening. But something inside each of them had shifted. There was a quiet peace in their friendship now. No confusion, no guilt, just gratitude. They had acknowledged what was there and chosen to keep it pure. A few weeks later, Claire invited Evelyn to a small dinner for her birthday. It was just the three of them again. The table was decorated with candles, soft music played, and laughter filled the room. At one point, Claire raised a glass and said, "To new beginnings, and to the people who remind us that life can still surprise us." They clinked glasses, smiling, the warmth in their eyes saying more than words could. After dinner, they sat by the window, watching snow begin to fall. Ryan turned to Evelyn and said, "Do you ever think about how moments like this happen when you meet people who make you see life differently?" Evelyn nodded. "I think they happen when you're ready to feel again." Claire smiled softly. "Then maybe we were all ready." It was a simple conversation, but it carried a quiet depth. They weren't talking about romance or longing. They were talking about the kind of emotional connection that changes people, the kind that heals wounds you didn't know were still open as the night ended. Claire hugged Evelyn tightly. "You're family to us," she whispered. Ryan gave a small nod, his expression warm. Evelyn walked home through the softly falling snow, her heart light. She didn't feel lonely anymore. She didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like someone who had been part of something meaningful, something that reminded her that connection, in any form, is what gives life its color. Over the next few months, life moved forward naturally. They all stayed close, sharing updates, helping each other, living ordinary days with extraordinary warmth. Evelyn often thought about that night by the fire, about how love doesn't always mean possession or promises. Sometimes it's simply being present. One evening, as she watched the sunset from her porch, Evelyn saw Ryan and Claire sitting on their front steps, talking and laughing softly. She smiled, knowing that their bond had grown stronger, and in some way she had helped rebuild it. It made her heart swell with quiet pride. She realized something beautiful that moment. Sometimes people come into your life not to stay forever, but to remind you of what love, kindness, and understanding truly mean. And that's enough. That night, as she turned off the lights and lay in bed, Evelyn thought about how everything had started with a look. a glance across a backyard that led to friendship, healing, and rediscovered joy. There had been no grand romance, no promises, no heartbreak, just a journey of three people learning to see each other clearly, and she knew, deep in her heart, that this story wasn't about what couldn't happen. It was about what did compassion, closeness, and the courage to feel again. They wanted to watch her not out of desire, but out of empathy, to see how someone could rise again after loss. And she, in return, had watched them to people learning how to love again through forgiveness and warmth. It wasn't about ownership. It was about recognition. And that made all the difference. As snow fell gently outside her window, Evelyn smiled. The connection they shared would always remain untouched, genuine, and unforgettable. And though the world would never quite understand it, Evelyn knew one truth with certainty: sometimes being seen is the purest form of love there is.